Very testing audio.
I
My
can hear
voice is very, very hoarse right now.
Oh,
Are you able to understand me at all?
yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's not good.
Do you think you have come down with something?
Definitely.
Do you know what?
Relationship issues.
Okay. You've been yelling?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, okay. I get it now.
Yeah.
Dare I ask?
I may have to go and get hot water or coffee or tea from time to time.
Okay.
I have
Yeah.
a cold right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I have learned over the years that yelling generally makes things worse. Oh, here's Stacy. Wait till she's connected.
Hello, Stacy.
Hello.
Hello.
I was just explaining to Barry that my voice is almost gone, so I may not be speaking very much today. In fact, Barry, I'm going to make you host.
All right.
I'm going to make you co-host because I think the recording will stop if I make you host. Stacy, I'm going to make you co-host also.
Okay. Do we have a topic or anything related to the end of the year?
I'm going to leave that up to you guys since I'm not able to speak very much today.
Barry?
Well, you had raised some points in Jerry's call, which maybe you'd like to delve deeper into if you'd like.
Which one? I mean,
Well, I think you only spoke up once or twice on that Thursday call. And you raised an issue which you thought I could respond to, which I did, but I don't know if I responded in what you were looking for or not. Or you can let that go by for now if you don't want to delve into it this morning.
well, there's two things that I'm always focused on, so I don't know which one. One is the ethical part, and one is the way we look at questions and finding the answers. And that's more of, not looking at it from a whole systems approach, even though we say we're systems thinkers. So I don't know which one of those places you want to walk down, or some, either one. I mean, for this, go ahead. I'll just let you talk.
Well, I mean, when I was responding to your comment, I was sort of watching reactions, and I saw a few people nodding their head when I raised the point, because you had raised the point about different tribes or whatever, affinity groups have different sets of rules to run by, and they're sometimes incompatible. That is, sometimes the rules of one group are so different than the rules of the other group that you can't figure out, what the people in Rome are doing to live by their standards. And I pointed out that it's not really about the difference between this set of rules and that set of rules. The issue is more fundamental, is that does there even exist a set of rules that does the job that you have in mind? That is, creating a well-regulated system that doesn't go off the rails. And my observation is there are ways of creating a well-regulated system, but the framework of rules is too kindergartenish, too simplified, mathematically incapable of achieving the goal in mind, that you have to advance to a more sophisticated regulatory mechanism than just a simple rule-based mechanism. And I don't think that's a radical observation, but it's not a commonly appreciated one in the general population.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I look at that same issue, but I'm looking at it from the other angle. So like in the general population, I'm looking at it from from an individual point of view. And what is the internal set of rules that people follow within themselves? Because for me, that's the most consistent way to judge. So if there are a lot of people who I have recognized internally are following a set of rules, and there's a large concentration of those people, I have more faith or trust that the group will operate in a certain way. So, all right, let me, so for example, if I'm in a group where the way things work is I notice people will challenge each other in a polite way or say, you know, that's not nice, or you really shouldn't do that, and it's well received, then I know the group holds itself to certain standards, and I appreciate that. And that's where I want to be, because if you can't trust the group to do that, or if you have too many people who change the rules based on who they're being applied to, you have nothing. And that's like what's happening in politics now. Like when I see somebody lying, I'm more interested in the people that have been lied to and how they then think about it. You know, are they upset that they were lied to, or do they make excuses? Because that shows me the kind of thinker they are. You know, and of course that brings in emotions and maturity and all those other things, but it boils down to honesty within yourself and to others. And when you're willing to bend the rules, and frankly, I don't want to be, yeah, I'll stop there. Once I see the thumbs up, that's a good place to stop.
That was a thumbs up of agreement, not a thumbs up like, or
I know.
hand up, I wanted to talk, right?
Right, yeah, it was a thumbs up of agreement, which is like, you know what, that's the place, you know, why push it?
Yeah. You see, a regulatory mechanism wants to have the power to recover from a departure from well-mannered behavior. So the question, and a more generic term is regulation as opposed to rules. You know, they say rules and regulations, they sort of throw the two, but rules are very bureaucratic, and regulation is a more generalized but also vaguer abstraction. So how do you regulate something where a rule-based mechanism fails? And rule-based mechanisms are known to fail in systems that tend to go a little bit chaotic or dramatic. So anything that tends to run into chaotic dynamics, typically a rule-based mechanism is typically is not only inadequate, it's often counterproductive. It tends to make things even more chaotic. And so this has been a challenge that has perplexed humankind for a long time, not because it's insoluble, but because the solution requires some sophisticated mathematical insight, which most people simply don't have. And the people who got really, really good at figuring out how to craft a well-regulated system that can recover from perturbations gracefully, there's sort of two kinds of disciplines where that turned up. One is in theology, it turned up, and the other one is in technology, that is building technology systems that are well-behaved, well-regulated, that can recover from perturbations. And the people who understood the insights, understood the concepts, tended to have more success if they did it for non-living technology systems. So we can build non-living technology systems that are very graceful, very well-behaved, and can recover from perturbations without, you know, going off the rails. And the theologians tried to do that for human systems and didn't get very far. And politics has sort of worked against that, because the same ideas that allow you to well-regulated system, you can use those nefariously to dysregulate it. And there are bad actors. There are bad actors, trolls and nefarious characters, is what you would call evil characters, who use the same insights to derail it as opposed to re-rail it. And people like that end up getting in power because they're charlatans who promise things that cannot be delivered, and often they know they cannot be delivered because they're trying to fool you. All the spammers and trolls and bad actors who are finagling people into believing that they can do things that they're not going to do. I didn't say that very well. I'll stop there because you have your hand up.
Well, this ties into exactly what I was going to say when you were talking about how the system itself, the system of regulation itself isn't enough, because I think what needs to be in conjunction with that is the leadership. And
Right.
if you don't have a leadership that
Right.
has integrity, and I
Right.
also want to add, though, having that leadership be to one person will not work.
Right.
It just won't. And two, I mean, personally, I think it needs to be three, and this is where, like, when Sam talks about, and I forgot which note it was, but there's one thing where he talks about having a person to become accountable to, and I always say, I really think it needs to be two people, because I think that you need like those three different angles to be able to really throw things back and forth and see what you're missing when you're judging if something is ethical or what piece is being missed. But the main point I want to make is you need the proper system in place, but you also need the proper leadership in place. And I will just share that I just got blocked from a group. It's on my mind, so I'll just share it real quickly. You don't mind, do you? So I'm in this one group of people that are over 50 and single, and it's really interesting. I really enjoy the conversations. And I had put up something had happened, and I had then put up and the post was taken down. And no rules were broken in the post or anything, but somebody was nasty, I said, that really wasn't very nice. Somebody, it was a conversation, and that post was later removed. I then put up a post and I said, it's really disappointing when posts that do not break the rules are taken down. How else can we learn about each other if we don't see how people react in different situations? And I was then blocked. No word, nothing was said. So I had no way to reach the administrator or anything. I went back through different chat messages and I found a couple of people, and I found this one woman that I had spoken to, and she got me the name of the administrator, and I sent her a message, saying, I don't know if this was an error, but whatever. I got no response. Anyway, I don't want to go into that story. The story I want to talk about is, and Barry, you've been pushed out of groups. In this case, I personally don't care, but these are people's communities. And to have somebody thrown out of a community based on the decision of one person, that's a really scary thing. I mean, this is just a silly illustration and I will live, but it's scary. And where it does, okay, I do have one more thing on my mind. Since it's the end of the year, I'm getting it out there. One of the ethical things that I want to talk about, I was going to save it for an OGM call because that's more where I think the audience will be there, is when we know that somebody is operating in a way that we claim to say we don't want to keep doing. Maybe they're known to be misogynistic, or maybe they're not so democratic, and we then choose to work with them. Do we put up conditions? Do we say, well, we're going to work with this person, but do we then tell the person, you cannot continue to do this? Because what I have witnessed in these conversational communities are people, and will I say the name? I know of a person who has kicked out people from their group, you being one of them, Doug Breitbart being another one.
Sounds like you're talking about John Keldon to me.
And I also know that he's doing very good work. But I also know that when I've witnessed him throw women out of the group, or I've witnessed him being brought into a conflict resolution thread where he set up the method of conflict resolution, he swiftly left.
Yep, I went through that exact same scenario with him.
So my point is, if you're going to have a leader and the leader doesn't follow their own rules, are you just going to stay quietly if it benefits you? And that's what I mean. That's what I meant on the other call when I was saying, I want to have more of these ethical conversations where we as individuals are asking ourselves these questions. Because, I mean, we're only human. We don't always think about it from all the different angles. It doesn't have to be black and white. It doesn't have to be, no, I'm not going to work with this person. Yes, I am. There can be ways of negotiating. So anyway, sorry I rambled, but those were really on my mind that I didn't think I was going to bring up, but.
Yeah, as you well know, if something relatively minor happens, I'll therapize myself by writing a simple song parody. If it's major, I'll write an entire feature-length comic opera. I did write a feature-length comic opera on the issue with John Keldon, and it's been up on the internet for I don't know how many years now. And the only value of doing that is it therapizes me. It doesn't fix the situation. There is no way, there's no known way to fix the situation. But historically, whenever a situation is dysfunctional, somebody, typically a well-known writer, writes a satire or parody. Was it Pilgrim's Progress? I can't remember. Gulliver's Travels. There are some classical satires and parodies in the literature, and they were written because people ran into these intractable problems where those in power were committed to a rule-based regulatory mechanism, and then someone like me or a creative person will find creative ways to circumvent the rules without violating the rules. And in fact, creativity generally involves breaking some rule that doesn't really need to be there. It's just there. Let me let Joshua in case, where's my mouse? There it is.
He's in, I let him in.
And so people who are very creative will throw a monkey wrench into a bureaucratic style supervisor. And they will throw out the creative person rather than adapt to an emerging, evolving creativity. And so what does the creative person do? They create a work of art, make good art. Remember that line from Neil Gaiman? So make good art is creating literature or theater or some kind of satire or comedy that lampoons the dysfunctional system. And that's really, where we are today.
Right. And I guess what I'm trying to point out is, let's take it away from the example I used. The point I'm trying to make is that every one of us makes decisions like this every day.
Right.
These people don't get there just, like just by some shot out of a vacuum. They're enabled on a daily basis by friends and acquaintances that just, allow it, that don't say anything for whatever reason. And it could be on something very little. And I'm not saying to always be picking on somebody. And believe me, I know what it's like. It's not fun to be the person to say, that's kind of racist. It's not fun.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel good.
That
I just want to make this point really clear. If we did it in a gentle way, and if it wasn't only one person saying it, and if we were able to accept that, like, oh, you know what, I didn't think about it, it might get easier. Okay, I'm done now.
If you look historically at scenarios of this general type and classical ones, popular ones, whenever there is a dysfunctionality in the system, and it's visible, everybody can see there's a dysfunctionality. It's not a subliminal one. It's above radar dysfunctionality. One of the most common things to do is to find one person to blame it on. And that person is called the scapegoat. And so the scapegoating mechanism, which dates back, I don't know, more than 3,000 years, says find one person to blame it on and throw them out of the system. Now, the scapegoating mechanism doesn't fix the problem. It just delays it because another person is going to come along and manifest the same dysfunctionality later on. So the scapegoating mechanism has been studied in depth for millennia. And one of the big differences between the Old Testament and the New Testament is the realization that the scapegoating mechanism needs to be discarded. The scapegoating mechanism was introduced in the Old Testament, and it was a real goat. They blamed everything on the goat on Yom Kippur, and they kicked it out to the wilderness, and that was the ritual that was supposed to resolve the distress. Well, a couple thousand years later, the theologians realized that this scapegoating mechanism, scapegoating ritual, wasn't the solution. And so in the New Testament, you have a big drama over revealing the dysfunctionality of the scapegoat mechanism. And a few people bought it, and most people didn't get it. So you have a theology that eschews the scapegoat mechanism, but the adherents to it still use it anyway, because they don't really understand it.
You know, I think that's a really good place to really focus on, because that's what's happening. I mean, and again, it's not going to be a positive, it's not going to be, I wish I could see Sam's face. Sam, come back on camera, because I need to see your face when I say this. Because I don't like the man, but if we're going to look at this from, a really objective point of view, aren't we kind of scapegoating Donald Trump in certain ways?
Not so much. He is an exemplar of the dysfunctionality. So he's sort of, the spotlight is on him as a not promote is the wrong word, but a progenitor of the dysfunctionality.
Yeah,
getting rid of Donald Trump doesn't solve the problem.
Let me be clear, because, and he probably wasn't I probably could have found a better example. That's not to say that that he's without blame. He's with plenty of blame.
Yeah.
But what I'm talking about is blaming everything on one person, because the
Right.
other problem is
Right.
thinking he's going to go away is not going to solve the problem. But I'll think of it. But I will think of a better example where somebody gets scapegoated, but it's not coming to mind. But my point is, when we make it about one person,
Right.
that's an issue, and that kind of is related to scapegoating.
Yep. So once you realize that blaming 100% of the dysfunctionality on one person is, first of all, analytically incorrect, and two, itself a dysfunctionality, a meta dysfunctionality, now you have this theological, philosophical, analytical challenge of supplanting the scapegoating mechanism by something that is not only superior, but will take root and work. And that we have identified in theory some superior mechanisms. We have attempted to implement them, but they still haven't really taken root, and they haven't really been made to work. So we're in this sort of in between where there's literature, but we haven't evolved to the next higher level of regulatory mechanisms, which is ethical best practices. Ethical best practices is the name of the superior mechanism, but what exactly is it? And how do you reckon ethical best practices, and how do you get it to be the dominant paradigm? That's, maybe humans will never get there. Maybe we're just not wise enough, intelligent enough.
Sam had a hand up.
That was going way back in direct response to, is Donald Trump a scapegoat? So
Which I took back.
Then I will not respond.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, he is a scapegoater. He would routinely pick somebody to blame for the trouble and kick them out, or at least criticize them, viciously criticize them. And of course, you could see that whenever Donald Trump scapegoated, it was just baloney. Okay.
Thank you. Much better example.
And so, one of the most insightful guidelines is don't do to other people what you wouldn't want them to do to you. That's just basically the Hillel version of the golden rule. So if there's a mechanism that you wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of it, then don't put somebody else on the receiving. Don't be the initiator of it. And that's a guideline because it doesn't specifically say which practice. It just says any practice that you wouldn't want to be the victim of. Don't victimize the other people. So, and the reason for that is that our culture is an echo chamber. So if you throw out a practice, it's going to eventually rebound to you. It might go around the loop before it comes back, but that's like karma. What goes around comes around. So if you engage in the practice of scapegoating, even at a low level, it becomes a regular practice in the culture, and pretty soon you're going to be on the receiving end of it. And that's exactly what's happened with Donald Trump. He was on both ends of the, saying he's solely responsible for what happened on January 6th. Well, he's probably primarily responsible, but he's not the only one who was in the loop. I mean, there was this whole little coterie. So the question is, how can you fix that whole dysfunctionality? And the answer is the government can't, because the government is a rule-based framework. The government is not inherently an ethical best practices framework. It could be, but then you would need people in government who were facile in systems thinking and ethical best practices, and politicians by definition are sort of the opposite. They're the least competent in systems thinking and ethical best practices. And that's a sort of a paradox. It's more of a conundrum than a paradox. But it's a challenge that is partly the explanation of the famous Fermi paradox. Why aren't there any other intelligent civilizations out there in the cosmos? And one theory is that they all get stuck where we're stuck, and then they basically thrash themselves to death. And that's a hypothesis that hasn't been able to be falsified, because we haven't found any civilizations, including our own, that's transcended that phase of dysfunctionality, that rule-based, chaotic, dynamic dysfunctionality, even though there are people, who can get up on YouTube and talk about it. I mean, it's not like we don't have anybody who can articulate it, but people's eyes tend to glaze over when you do that. You lose your audience because it's abstract. It's very abstract. Systems thinking is very abstract. You lose your audience. Go ahead, Sam.
I do agree with your statements. I do think it's sad that unlike most other countries where they have a mix of expertise in government, in this country, I believe the predominant background for politicians appears to be quote unquote law.
Right.
The problem though is if you're truly good at law, you would have a much expanded, almost systemic view of the way law works, of the way society works. It's not evident though in the people who actually practice it in our national levels, even probably in our, the main three branches. So the problem is they come with a background of law, but they don't exhibit any deep or systemic view, or that is entirely beaten out of them by the agenda that is, de jour. So almost, by definition, being a member there says you abdicate your systemic view. You can't practice it anymore. So I find that an interesting thing. I do agree. We should get lawyers, out of government. We get more people in government. Well, that would be a good thing. But even the lawyers who are there need to be more lawyerish and less butt lickers. There's just brown nosing.
Yeah. Because they want to stay in the system. See, if you point out that the system itself is inherently flawed in its axiomatic foundation, which the rule of law is, the phrase law and order is an oxymoron. The axiom of law and order is a false axiom. Rule-based systems are inherently dynamic, chaotic. They define games, they define dramas, they define dynamic, chaotic systems. And so if you believe in law and order, you believe in games, drama, and chaos, not order, because that's what rules generate. And that's a mathematical observation that was not really fully appreciated until the second half of the 20th century, when we finally got a rigorous introduction into chaos theory. I never would have figured out chaos theory, except that in the middle of the 20th century, a bunch of really smart people not only figured it out, but wrote it up in a way that I could understand and independently confirm. Go ahead, Stacy.
Yeah, just to put this in really simple terms, some people believe that law is about finding truth and justice, but the truth is that law has become about finding whether or not something falls within the rules set up.
Right. Yeah.
And until that dichotomy is, figured out, I don't see how you move forward, because you're literally taught as a lawyer, you're taught, forget about what's fair or true or just. This is your job. Get it to fit. Sam?
I could be wrong here, but my understanding is that you are correct in this country. The law is set up so that I forget the legal term for these two parties, the defendant, the plaintiff, they argue their case. And it's not about truth, it's about who argues better. Right. That is not the case in other countries. There are other countries where it is about the truth and it's not about who argues what. Yep. So that is, I think, a distinction worth acknowledging and saying there are countries that don't take this adversarial model of law.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that was the beauty of Judge Judy. I think that's why people enjoyed Judge Judy, because it was about the truth.
Right.
And there's another guy in Connecticut. There's, have you seen the videos of this guy in Connecticut who's actually kind of a very warm-hearted guy and understands the troubles that people go through and
Judge Matthew
causing verdicts. I'll see some links.
Barry?
Listen to when pundits use the word justice, especially when there's a horrendous crime. What they mean by justice is punishment. Pronouncing somebody guilty and then delivering state-sponsored violence upon them, punishing them. If you look at the theory of justice, the way John Rawls taught it at Harvard, justice does not mean punishment. And there is retributive justice, and what's the other one called? Restorative justice. In this country, justice means retributive, that if you hit me, I get to hit you back. I'm entitled by law to hit you back. Restorative justice says, if I am damaged because somebody hit me, I'm entitled to have my damage restored by the system. The system has got to come in and therapize me. Okay. And so when people say justice, it sounds like a positive thing because the word sounds positive, but in fact, what they really mean is retributive justice. I get to create, under the guidance of the law, some damage upon those who damaged me. And that is the mistake that Gandhi pointed out, an eye for an eye, and pretty soon the whole world is blind. That's how he phrased that. And we cannot get out of the framework, the mental framework, that justice means retribution. Cause equal and opposite damage. Let's double the damage. If I got damage, I get to damage you equally. That belief is a misconception. From the point of view of systems thinking, it's a misconception, but our species just can't seem to grow out of that framework.
Because they're too emotional.
Exactly. Yeah. You hit me, I get to hit you back. And even Moses says, only hit them back no harder than they hit you. Only an eye for an eye, only a tooth for a tooth, only a limb for a limb. And the Buddha comes along and says, make it less than. That is, if you're going to do retribution at less than par. So if you do retribution at less than par and you graph it, it gradually tails off and the area under the curve is finite. But if retribution is equal, it runs on forever. And the total amount of damages increases. And in some cases, the retribution is more violence than the incident violence. So what happens is if you graph the total amount of damage, you want the area under the curve to descend as rapidly as possible to minimize the total damage. Mathematically, that's duh. you can see that if you do the math, but most people don't think mathematically. They simply think in the near term, I get to hurt you because you hurt me. And I want to hurt you because you hurt me.
And my kids,
Theologian. So,
and your kids get to hurt me.
say again?
And my kids get to hurt your kids. And
Yeah.
their kids get to hurt your kids.
Right. And theology really got introduced initially to overthrow that framework, that eye for an eye framework. That was really the main thrust of theology, was to elevate people's insight and wisdom to mature out of that framework, that childlike framework. And it has never succeeded. It wasn't misguided. The idea was we got to evolve out of it. That's true. The question is, how do you elevate people out of that? And the theologians came up with their best solution to it, which basically didn't work.
Well, I think part of the reason it doesn't work is because those that try and play by a set of rules are putting themselves in a weakened position, because those that aren't trying don't have those constraints. So they have no rules. So it's literally like playing game with your arms tied behind your back.
Yeah.
So how can you win unless you have so much as far as the numbers, you know, the whole strength in numbers thing, and you just band together and say, this is going to be the way we go, period, the end. And we don't deal with other people. They can have their own little game.
It is very dangerous to be a creative person. If you look at creativity in the arts, especially in the music. So I was just looking at the Buddy Holly story, the movie, the Buddy Holly story, and how he was very creative and very innovative. And the people who were sort of running the music industry didn't want him because he was overthrowing the style of music that they thought they could sell. And he had a real struggle, and he wasn't the only one, but there were lots of other innovators in the arts who had a devil of a time introducing creative ideas into the arts because the powers that be wanted to overrule them and not allow it to happen, even though the audience ended up loving it. The people in power believed that the audience wouldn't love it, that they would stop tuning into that station or whatever. And so you see that people in power basically, you know, want to exercise constraints on creativity. That's a conundrum that, you know, you have to be very, so a lot of lyrics are very allegorical. If you look at popular song lyrics, especially in rock and roll, you don't know what they're about. They don't sound like they're about anything because you don't have the mapping to what they're a metaphor for. By the way, I mentioned this before. There's lots of evidence, semiotic evidence, that this is an old idea. The name of the most best known chaos monster in the Old Testament is Leviathan. Leviathan is just the given name of the chaos monster. And if you take the name Leviathan, you say, what does it mean in English? It means the legacy of the Levites, the legacy of the clerks, the clerical priests, the rule makers. It's the legacy of the rule makers. Literally, that's what the name means. My grandfather's name was Nathan. And Nathan is the word for gift. Ordinary gift is atan, and a wonderful, marvelous, awesome gift is natan. The letter N in the prefix is like an exclamation mark in our grammar. So Levi Natan would be the wonderful legacy of the Levites, but it's Levi Atan. The gift of the Levites looks like a Christmas tie, thanks a lot. So Chaos Monster is named Levi Atan, the gift of the Levites, which was the gift of the rules. Because the Leviticus is just a book of rules. The Levites wrote Leviticus, which is all these ritualistic rules that you got to follow, you know, very bureaucratically. And the high priest lampooned it by naming the chaos monster after the legacy of the bureaucrats, bureaucratic clerics.
So we know it's wrong. So do we have any solutions?
Well, the only solution I can manifest is education. So you want to write up these educational insights in a way that is as consumable as possible for the general public. And that's where I stumble, because I know how to write for my peer group, people with, graduate level college degrees. I can write for that audience. That's, if you're lucky, 5% of the population can digest what I write. I don't know how to write it for the general public. The theologians try to write it for the general public, and people who are high up said, this is kindergarten stuff, So how to write it for the middle class? I'll be damned if I know. I think edutainment, satire, and parody is probably the sweet spot for the general public.
So I agree with you on the edutainment, not on the satire and the parody.
Mhm.
So like I look at something like John Quinones, What Would You Do? Have you ever seen that TV show? They set up these mock scenarios.
Ethical conundrums.
Yeah. And then you get to observe how different people would react.
Yeah.
I mean, for me personally, I've learned from that, because situations, sometimes you're in a situation that you never expected. So
Right.
many times I might say something and then later I was like, oh, that's not really true, because I had time to reflect on what I thought or what I said. There have been times, one time in particular, where I saw something on that show, and then later I had a similar thing happen to me. And that way I was prepared to behave in a way that I could feel really good about, instead of just being frozen and not knowing what to do.
Right.
But I want to say the reason that I move away from the satire and the parody has a lot to do, like, when we'll mention like Romeo and Juliet, or all the different pieces of literature where things go awry because of the misunderstanding.
Right.
And so with satire and parody, there's so much opportunity for misunderstanding that I don't like to get mixed in with there. In the show, What Would You Do? At the end, everybody knows what really was going on. Nobody is being kept in the dark. And my personal thing is, I don't think people should be kept in the dark. I really do.
The question is how to turn on the light so that it illuminates what people are not seeing. That turns out to be very difficult.
Well, I think when you watch yourself in the video, the light goes on.
Yeah, that's the challenge, to get the aha moment, the now I see. And the thing is, it tends to be very idiosyncratic for the individual. There isn't a method that works for the general audience. And there's always going to be somebody who is just resistant, just not seeing. And you have to do something very, very custom and very special and very effortful for that, just for that one person. If that one person is Donald Trump, what the hell do you do? Or if it's Richard Nixon or George Bush Jr., what do you do for the one person who is the most resistant to having the lights turned on? I don't know.
You may not have to care about that one. That one person may not matter. What's more important are the other people who, first of all, it's a lot easier to see a mistake that you have not already made.
Yes.
So, so if you're in the audience watching something and you're not attached to it through your own ego or through guilt or shame or anything like that,
Right.
It's a lot easier to learn from that situation. And
Right.
I'm way more interested in what people can learn before they make the mistakes, or before it's, the spotlight is focused on them, than getting at one person.
Star Trek was a bunch of morality plays. They did it with aliens, and so you wouldn't realize that they're talking about you, but basically they were creating these synthetic characters that were reifying dramas which are right here on the surface of the earth, everyday 20th century problems. And those writers are very good at writing morality plays. There was a kind of theology in Star Trek. And the same is true in the Peanuts cartoon. There was a kind of theology in that too. They were trying to awaken people to things that they were in the dark about, or misconceptions. But it takes a very, very clever, talented, creative artist to figure out how to produce something that gets a lot of eyeballs. Not only gets a lot of eyeballs, but people actually gain some insight.
Well, and that's the thing. So as you know, I'm very resistant to writing long creative pieces, but I'm not resistant to having conversations. And there's a whole world of people on Facebook that are just like me. They're ready to have the conversation at any time. So
Yeah.
why does it always have to be a big production? Why does everything always have to be planned?
Oh, it's not that so much. It's that if you do it one-on-one, it will take a long time to go through a dozen people. If you can have 12 people in one session instead of 12 sessions with one person, see, I would rather have a seminar with 12 people in one session than a sequence of 12 sessions with one person. But most people will want to have a one-on-one. Well, that's great for them, but it's bad for the guy who wants to have, 12 clients, because you can't, you're just repeating the same conversation over 12 times with 12 different people. Why can't we do it all in one colloquium? And the answer is, I don't know why we can't, except that turns out we can't.
Well, I would just bring it down to 6 people, but I would think that doing that with 6 people would be perfect, especially if it's the right 6, balanced with different perspectives. I would think that would be great.
Yeah. So, what I found is that I can be most effective one-on-one with that one person, but then I'm ineffective with all the others who are not present during that session, and I run out. So time becomes, and also just, you become worn
You
out
keep
doing the same.
saying it, yeah.
So I don't know a good solution for, what's the optimum number of people to have a parallel session with, where everybody is present and all on the same page at the same time. I simply don't have a good solution for that. The efficient way is impractical and the practical way is inefficient. So, where's the sweet spot? I don't know. My friend Anne Marie, she's teaching, I think, 5th grade this year. By the time you get to 5th grade, the students are no longer a peer group. They're so far apart in where they are in their learning curve. If you start with like 2nd graders, they're all pretty close in terms of where their learning frontiers of learning are. By the time you get to 5th grade, practically every student is a special case. You can't talk to the class as a whole. You got to, each individual person has got their own little sweet spot, and it becomes impossible to educate as you get to older and older students, because the population gets farther and farther dispersed from readiness.
Yeah. Sam had put up a meme about education. I don't remember what it was.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he's close by, but that's an interesting conversation too.
Yeah. But, so Anne Marie, who is, public school teacher, she's experienced this, and she can compare her 2nd grade students to her 5th grade students, and, how much more challenging it is. And other people have said the same thing, that by the time you get to middle school, the students have sort of lost the ability to learn in school. The school just simply becomes an activity that's not very productive in terms of learning. People have observed this. I mean, Sagan talked about it. The curiosity, the fascination of learning, especially in science, diminishes. And I think that's because the rigidity of the school system tends to make people unenthused about attending school.
Yeah, definitely a problem.
Yep. And then you have adults who graduate from school when they really haven't learned enough of what they need to learn to be able to function in a dysfunctional society. It's very hard to cope and adapt and function if you're embedded in a dysfunctional society. You end up with a lot of maladaptive practices, including some really bad ones like, drugs and other kinds of escapism. You're just escaping from society. I mean, the internet, I joined the internet, 35 years ago to escape from the public agora. Here
They found you.
The public agora came in here and made
found
cyberspace. They made cyberspace dysfunctional. So, there you have it. Let's pause and see if Joshua wants to say hello.
Oh, I'm just listening right now.
Yeah, well, yes, we know that you like to listen. We just don't, we don't want to hog the bandwidth so much that you can't even pipe up to say, I'm listening. So, anybody, feel free to react to anything, because I always appreciate what you have to say.
Appreciate it. I just have to get to the microphone because I'm not near the I'm walking around, not near the computer. So it's like, let's see if Joshua has something to say. I gotta run back upstairs to the computer, open up the thing.
Oh, okay, yeah,
But yeah, I'll come on real soon. Let me
all right,
I'm just
yeah.
trying to get there. Thank you so much, Barry. Yeah, I would love to join the conversation.
Yeah. So, so yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking about these conundrums about what's the dysfunctionality in our system. How do you diagnose the dysfunctionality? And then the hard part is, what are the ethical best practices for remediating dysfunctionality? And the more deeply embedded is the dysfunctionality, the harder it is to remediate it. Here comes Kayla. Let her in. Hello, Kayla.
So going to what Sam had posted, the comment that I had made, it was about, I'm trying to remember. Sam, do you have that? Do you have that post? Because my comment, it was something about, you know, where education system is, it only values success in terms of financial success. Like it trains you up for financial success, something like that. And I think my comment was that there are people that do believe that the purpose of education should be about financial success, not necessarily us, but there are people that believe that's all it should be. There are other people that believe it should be to develop the person as a whole. There are people, I would think people here that believe it should be a little bit of both. But my point is, if we don't discuss that and come to an agreement about what it should be, then how could we design the proper system? We don't even know what we're asking the system to do.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. I think that the most of the point of that post was that there are people who have this limited view that success is just financial. And it's not a bad thing. If you sort of take a look at the Darwinian arc, it's very extrapolatable. It's at the point where now that takes over and we don't recognize other aspects of being human. That's where a lot of this dysfunctionality comes in. Any simple system taken, any simple set of principles taken to the extreme will create dysfunction. And this very simplistic model of education, I think, is one example of that. That was the main point of the post, if I recall it correctly.
Oh yeah, just to be clear, I wasn't disagreeing with the post at all. You have to understand that my main reason for being on the internet at all is to be a bridge builder and to try and bring ideas together and people together. So that's always behind any motivation I have to comment. So that was just an opportunity to make that point. Let's figure out what is it that we want, because you'd be surprised when you start talking to people.
I think that these actions of trying to figure out what we want versus actually changing the systems that we live in have to happen in parallel. We can't have this sequential view, okay? There's never going to be agreement. There can only be further elaboration. So you further elaborate on the discussion of values and the objectives and strategies, but you also have to avoid inaction. You have to be doing things, you know, small things. The, you know, Buckminster Fuller trim tabbing. We're doing all of that at the same time.
Yeah, well, I mean, it definitely has to be done at the same time. But again, I'm talking about like the average person. You want to know, well, this school is geared towards this. I mean, some people send their children to certain schools that take a more holistic approach. They have made the decision, they know what they're looking for, and they're going to send their children there. Of course, they have the financial resources to be able to make that decision.
Right.
But I'm not saying only have one. I'm saying figure out what you want. If you want something different, then you know that's something new that has to be created as well. I don't, and this goes back to, I think Barry mentioned it earlier when oh no, that was a different conversation. I had said that I don't think there's one game to be played, and I don't think there should be. I think there should be parallel tracks for many things. And education would be part of that.
Yeah, and for the record, there are vocational schools which absolutely recognize the objectives of training is to get jobs and to be skilled in certain professions. And on the flip side, just to be transparent, I sent my older two kids not to they went to public school first, but then I pulled them out and took them to a private school. And that private school, for the record, is the Ananda Living Wisdom School, which balances the traditional quote unquote academic curriculum with life and values and spirituality and those kind of teachings. So that was a choice I had. Yes, it did take more money. And so I did want to acknowledge that without having it be under the rug. But I did that for very specific reasons. The public school was failing my kids because their teachers were borderline incompetent. And so that's a story I've recounted before as well. Anyway, just wanted to acknowledge that data point. Over.
I was actually thinking about this yesterday, how I wished that early education was modeled the way higher education is. I was in my late 50s before I ever heard the name Buckminster Fuller. And yet, the more I know, he's in my DNA. From what I know of him, I think just like him, and yet I never heard of him. To have heard of him when I was in elementary school, I think that would have made a big difference. Well, he wouldn't have been there. I guess that timeline's off.
Kayla dropped. Oh, Kayla's back. Okay. Hi, Kayla.
Hi.
You vanished for a second, but then you're back.
Yeah, it is. I've got to get a net extender for my internet.
Happy New Year, by the way, to everybody. I don't know when I'm going to be dropping off.
Happy New Year, Stacy.
Happy New Year. So getting back to
with the weather in New York, Stacy.
Today it's rainy and cold, but not as cold as it was. It was really, really cold a few days ago. Then it warmed up to like the 50s. Now it's, the chill is back, but not as cold as it was. Thank you. It's hard walking the dog 3 times a day when it's like 20 degrees out.
No kidding. Good to hear. Continue, Barry.
Yeah, so getting back to this conundrum of what method is effective in raising the level of awareness of the general population. One of the things that might end up being tried in the 21st century, and this is just kind of speculative at this point, because AI is really ramping up in these decades. The next thing after AI is AW, artificial wisdom. And I don't know if the synthetic intelligence is going to ever get to synthetic wisdom or not, probably not in my lifetime. But if it does, that becomes yet another channel for the general public to become familiar. So you could ask not just ChatGPT, but SageGPT SageGPT, if I were to do this or do that or address this question, what's the downside of any of my options? And what's the ethical best practice? If SageGPT could give you a really good response to those kinds of questions, I imagine that maybe the general public would be able to elevate their familiarity with the practice of reckoning ethical best practices, like that TV show that you talked about, where people were discussing what would you do if.
But you know what, see, and I think that's true. And the other problem, the other challenge, though, is that there are still many people whose behaviors don't reflect what they say their ethics and values are.
Yep.
That's what I think we really collectively, and I do see it changing. And I do see more people doing inner work and becoming familiar with it and becoming more accepting. I do see that. But we still have to, you know, I think we still have to focus a lot of energy and attention there.
We do. I mean, it's a problem that humankind has faced for, you know, since the dawn of recorded history, some 6,000 years. And, you know, every new paradigm that gets introduced, artificial intelligence, computers, internet, whatever, you know, gives you another chance to find yet another channel for spreading, you know, the level of sagacity of the general public. Whether AW will do it, well, it might, if it comes into being, might make some progress, incremental. Whether it transforms it, it would astonish me if it transformed it.
Well, I don't see how it could, because I think that, I mean, even in education, you learn best by doing. I
Right.
mean, there are studies that show, go ahead, Sam. There are studies that show that a child will learn more from doing a lab than
Right.
by watching it being done.
Exactly.
We're still children. I'm going to learn more by actually doing something than just by thinking about it.
Yeah, games and simulations. But the games and simulations have to accurately portray the downside of what happens if you make a stupid mistake in a game. The game has to accurately replicate the downside if you did that in real life. Because it can't fool you into thinking that a technique is going to work just because it works in the game and it doesn't work in real life. Then the game has basically failed as a accurate emulation of reality. And that means that the game has to know how reality behaves. Which means it has to have a very good model of the dynamics of real systems. Sam?
I think it's an interesting extrapolation, what you're saying about AW, because insofar as information and knowledge can be relatively independent of any specific human, because well, you know, we're talking about facts, we're talking about the universe, we're talking about phenomena. Wisdom, at least the way I understand it, is so impersonal. Wisdom is about how any of that gets applied in one's life in their
Right.
certain conditions.
Right.
So for AW to be useful to you, it needs to understand a lot about you, in my
Yep.
opinion. And it needs to understand your values, your situation, your challenges, your strengths, your weaknesses, etc. So where ChatGPT can just take, you know, 200 trillion variables or whatever, be trained on that. Now, if you really want to get to AW, you have to take all of that and either train it specifically for an individual and get 200,000 attributes of that individual, add that to the model, or take those 200 trillion attributes of any specific human and collect all of that for 8 billion humans and then make that useful.
Yeah,
So I think there's another whole level of challenge here.
yeah, you need
And,
trillions of you need trillions of points in the database instead of billions.
Yeah, so I'm just pointing out that there is a personal aspect to wisdom that to me doesn't necessarily exist with information, data, knowledge, etc.
But if you take the canon of Western literature, which is a lot of stories, those stories tend to be kind of Jung would call archetypal stories. So you could begin with the archetypal stories, the Jungian archetypes. And of course, you will always find individuals who don't fit any of the archetypes, the sui generis. You know, I was told by a psychologist that I'm sui generis. I didn't fit any of the conventional archetypes. And I think that's probably true of creative people in general. That they're
Sure, but I think to me, there's a simplistic version of wisdom, as in, yes, call your mom every weekend. Okay, yeah, that's a wise way to live. But that's the platitude story level. There's a much deeper, what should I do in this or that complicated situation that, you know, maybe only happens 1.5% of the time for most people.
Yeah.
That level is where most people are trying to get assistance. Not, should I go and make an apple pie for my kids? You know, that's not the
well,
level.
it has to be consequential, sort of survival, you know, life or death consequence. So, but yeah, so I have a certain amount of hope, you know, for the evolution of AI and AW, but I don't expect to live to see any significant breakthroughs. Maybe Maxwell will, or Aya might. Go ahead, Joshua.
Oh, I'm just trying to jump in the conversation, but I'm not quite at the same train of thought as both of you guys, because I don't even know how fast this shit's gonna ramp up. So
Who does?
this thing's ramping up really fast. So we'll see. I don't think it's about the amount of something. I think it's about the usefulness of something, and we'll find out what's useful and what's not useful. And I think that's what I'm hearing Sam say is wisdom is more than just calculating something or knowing pre-trained models. It's usefulness and logic and calculating something that has never been calculated before, like stepping into the unknown. And that's what wisdom helps you do, not re-mimic back what was, but what will be in a situation.
And that's what creativity is the Lulu, because creativity creates scenarios that are not in the past database. By definition, it's creative. It's not in the trained database. And so whenever something novel appears, because of creativity, you know, you basically have to adapt to a new set of observations, a new set of anecdotes, which are few in number. And, you know, by the way, ChatGPT 4 is supposed to come out sometime next year, and it's going to be trained on a database, I think an order of magnitude bigger than ChatGPT 3 was trained on.
Yeah.
Whether that makes any difference, I don't know.
Oh, I mean, everything makes a difference. Everything is, I don't know. I just find technology hard to talk about right now because it's just changing so fast. Midjourney 4 just came out and it's leaps and about like 100 times better than Midjourney 3, which is the photo creation software.
Oh, okay.
So.
Yeah, I saw that name. Boy, there's so many names of these systems, you lose track of even what the names are, let alone what they refer to.
Well, one is open source, one's not. It's kind of
okay. So what's proprietary?
Kind of simple.
So they're similar, but open source versus proprietary. Okay.
At the moment in time, yeah.
All right.
At this moment, but I heard what you were saying, Barry, about the differences between, you know, a second grader or first grader and a fifth grader, and that exponential. And I think, you know, I'd like to talk about what wisdom actually is. What Sam was touching on is what is wisdom. It's more than just telling you what you should do in any given system, as opposed to what you should do in this lifetime or multiple lifetimes. Like I think wisdom transcends just one lifetime for some ideologies and philosophies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's being able to anticipate the long-term consequences of a short-term decision. And so you need a model that not only is an accurate model, but makes reliable predictions far into the future. And we're short on those.
Or transcending this lifetime, I think also.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the theologians were among the first to attempt to do that. And I'm not sure how far in the future they could see. They could see farther than maybe one generation. Whether they could see as far as 7 generations, well, there's some evidence that they thought they could, but maybe.
What if they weren't even seeing into the future or the past? What if those just disappeared in their reality? There was just time went away. And there's another dimension outside of time. It's a lot to wrap your head around. I'm getting a very esoteric and philosophical, but I'm saying that there is other worlds like that. I've been studying ancient Egyptian writings and different philosophies and understandings in ancient Egypt and ancient cultures, and there's definitely other things going on this planet other than our, trajectory timeline of linear timeline.
Well, certainly in the world of fantasy fiction, you can invent imaginary worlds where activities are not causal. You can have causal loops, like time travel, and then you have a problem of how to make a story that a person can follow when it disobeys the linear causality of the world we actually do live in. Yeah, but you can conceive of imaginary worlds with completely different structures, 4-dimensional space and time travel and all, wormholes and all that kind of stuff.
Or you could experience it.
Well, you can experience it in a game. You can have a game that emulates it.
You can experience it with psychedelics too. That's what the ancient Egyptians were doing. They were doing a blue lotus plant and taking psychedelics and experiencing other dimensional worlds.
Yeah, that's right. The lotus turns up in the Odyssey, I think, as a psychedelic.
But is that real if you can't emulate the exact same experience for someone else? Meaning if I took ayahuasca and had an experience and then you took ayahuasca and had an experience, but where does that intersection happen? Where your experience, you saw the blue waterfall? Yes, I did too. Okay, did you take a left at that?
Look,
how do you
can do the same thing. I play a chess game and you play a chess game. Our two chess games may look nothing alike. It's just one instance of a huge set of possibilities. So yeah, I think that I read a novel and you read a novel, but they were not the same novel. So, there were things in your novel that weren't in mine and vice versa. So I don't think you can say that two experiences are, one-to-one identical. That even two instances of a game of checkers are not identical.
or two near-death experiences?
The same thing. Well, yeah, and then it become even weirder because you don't even have a language to represent what it was like. At least in chess, you could actually show the sequence of moves in a common, visual language. In these things,
They had a language. Yeah, they had in ancient Egypt, they had a language to represent that.
I don't know that there's a language to represent mental states in general. You can represent some mental states in a common language, but certainly not.
What are hieroglyphs then?
They're symbols that represent commonplace things, sort of
Places
things
in another dimension, right? That also exist in this dimension.
Yeah, I mean, if you had a really weird dream that's not anything like what ever experienced in real life, how would you write a hieroglyphic to express it? What would you use for the symbol? You could create a brand new symbol, but nobody knows what the symbol means.
Well, I would use the energy of animals, the animal energy. I would speak in the language of animal natures or nectars, of the puma, of the jaguar, of the owl, of the lizard, of the dragon, of the different energies of.
How would I know what those meant? Because I'm not an owl. So how do I know what the energy of an owl is?
You got to hang out in the woods with the owls, Barry. I'm just saying, like, there's a whole nother language out in the woods. It's really interesting. Sorry, my mind's on a whole different level because I listened to a podcast yesterday about a guy in Alaska who just had a life that just doesn't make any sense. He's just gold mining and he ended up finding over 30,000 woolly mammoths up in the permafrost in Alaska. And he's not even an archaeologist, and he just found all these bones, and it's just so weird.
Yeah, you look for something, you'll find something, but not the thing you were looking for.
Yeah. Well, he found his gold. He did the gold mining. He got the gold, but he found something more valuable, at least to him. It's, millions of dollars, if not 200, $300 million worth of prehistoric bones of saber-toothed tigers and dire wolves. And
then he has the challenge, what's he going to do with all that money? How's he
Well,
gonna
he's not
spend it?
gonna, he didn't even take the money. He's just collecting it as a hobby. That's the
Ex-
funny thing, is he doesn't
Right.
trust to tell anyone, because the company he has in 1928, they found the same things on the property, and then they told this place in New York, and then they took the bones and never gave them back, and then
Right.
dumped them out in the
Right.
East River or something.
Yeah, so, you
So
know, so the reward is the discovery the discovery itself is a reward.
I guess that's what I'm trying to get at with your conversation. Thank you for saying that, Barry, because the discovery is the reward. And I think that's what education is, in my mind, is once you gain the discovery of the thing, and you get the logic, how it works, you understand it, you've been educated on that phenomenon.
Yeah,
That's the reward right there.
right.
If you can utilize it, great. But if you can't, you still get the reward of
Right.
understanding,
The
how
thrill-
birds mate or something.
The thrill of the discovery is the reward, but the thrill is,
Yeah.
transient and idiosyncratic, and you can't give that thrill. You can't sell the thrill. You can entice somebody else to try the same experience and see if they get the thrill. I mean, solving puzzles and riddles like that, you solve a riddle or solve a puzzle, you get a thrill. If I give the same puzzle or riddle to somebody else, they may or not get the same thrill. They may or may not even solve it. They may get frustrated.
I just wanted to share real quick because you just struck something. I had to write it down. Christmas Eve, I woke up and the words I heard right before I was waking up in my dream was, life is about learning. And when you live your life that way, it's magical.
Right. Yeah.
That's beautiful, Stacy.
So,
I think I keep coming back to that Lewis Carroll quote, which I had on my website for 12 years. On the front page was, everyone's seeking a magical solution to their problems, but they refuse to believe in magic.
any technology sufficiently advanced.
And then, then you go to Arthur C. Clarke. But if you don't believe that something is possible, like I've been, every once in a while, I'll just pop into the flat earth rooms and just to listen, just to hear where they're coming from, to understand. And they're really curious to really know, how do you launch a satellite? Like, what's really going on here? Like, man, you can't maintain no satellites up there. Get out of here. You can't maintain a satellite up in the sky. That shit will fall down. Like, you can't, come on. The earth's flat. Like, let's just stop this lie. And there's just so much knowledge they just didn't get or understanding. So they're extrapolating with non-understanding of certain laws of science and physics. So it just doesn't make sense in their world. You look out over the ocean, it's flat.
Stacy, here's a piece of satire. You will find flat earthers all around the globe.
I'm going to use that, Barry. Thank you. It's pretty funny at the same time. It's sort of sad that there's certain bits of knowledge that we're missing. So someone can just come along and start telling people certain things, and then that makes more sense than reality. And then they're going into, and then I start thinking, well, why can't they just live in that world? Why can't they believe the world is flat? Like, why is that bad?
Have you ever asked, like, I think I would want to ask them, like, where they think the edges are.
Oh, they have more theories than you could imagine, Stacy, on that.
No, I mean, because some, like, again, I don't usually talk to people about flat earthers, but I might talk to people about different political conspiracies. And it's usually the simple questions that they're stuck on. And I'm like, when things are real and when things are true, and you ask a simple question, it's usually pretty easy to quickly come to an answer. So when I ask these simple questions and like they can't answer, maybe that will trigger some thinking. So I'm just
I've tried
curious.
that.
Where
Yeah,
do they,
I've tried
but
that.
where do they think the edges are?
Brazil is one of the edges. I would say that I'm just being the flat earth people. They would say you get to the edge of Russia, and then it goes up to Antarctica, and it falls off at the ice bridge, and it's just a big ice sheet around the whole thing.
So my next question would be, how many people have lost their lives falling off the edge of the earth? Like, how come we haven't heard about that?
there's giant mountains so that you can't get over those mountains. They're all frozen. So no
Okay.
one's lost their lives.
Okay, I was just wondering, like, what?
No, I know it's mind-boggling. I try to talk sense into like some logic, and they have a whole nother set of logic, which is what's fascinating to me of how everything works. And then I always hear this person comes in the room and says, how does a toaster work? And they go, I don't know. I'm not a toaster expert, but I know the world's not round. It's
Well, and
interesting logic.
that's the other thing I'd want to know. I'd want to know, what was the one thing that where was the doubt thrown into their mind that made them just throw everything else out the window?
It was a YouTube, I got to it. It was a YouTube video where everything's vibrating and matter is not real. So everything vibrates, and they heard something that just blew their mind that was not true, but it resonated true to them. So they think because that's true, then the world can be flat and the world can be all these other things because, yeah.
Well, I suppose in another dimension, the world can be flat. In another
That's what I
dimension.
know. Then you start thinking the world could be flat. And then I start, yeah.
Doesn't everything vibrate?
Well,
Seriously, aren't we agreed on that?
if you go back to some of the fundamentals of physics, that there's all what they call field theory. So everything is a field, and vibration in the field is what we call matter. So photons are vibrations, which are massless, but other vibrations are matter. So they have this whole thing called field theory. And then the question is the field of the cosmos flat? And does it have, and is it infinite, or does it have edges? So you can ask the same question, not of the Earth, but what is the framework of the fields in field theory? Is the field theory a flat manifold, and does it go on forever, or does it have edges? And if you listen to the theories about the expansion of the universe has a flat field. Their flat field framework, and it doesn't go on forever. It has edges.
Does it have layers?
Well, you can think of each kind of field as a layer if you like. So there's the electron field and the neutrino field and the electromagnetic field. So each of those can be thought of as a different layer. But the thing is, this is a mathematical framework that can be made to work. But then you have to ask yourself, well, is this mathematical framework real, or is it just a trick, just a mathematical trick? And the answer is, how would you know? How would you know?
That's what the ancient Egyptians were teaching. Just to interject, Barry, is they were teaching you take a rope and you stretch it and you create the universe. And then you do this thing with a net, and everything is a net that you're catching all of the material in it.
Yeah.
So it's very esoteric and very understanding that things are mathematical.
Yeah.
So it's a higher level of math.
Right. So once you go to the most abstract math, which is the most fundamental math, then these various questions of whether it's flat or curved, and whether it's finite or bounded or unbounded, all these questions that there are details in the math become real questions.
Yeah. And the fabric of space-time is a real question. That's what they're representing with that net.
Right.
So it's
I mean,
I don't think any one model of the universe is better than another. I just think you have to have, like the double slit experiment, you have to experience going up into a rocket ship and seeing the Earth from that perspective to really get it.
Yeah. Well, that's the visual. That's I'm from Missouri. Show me. So yes, you can be in a position where you can actually see things for real and not simply imagine what they would look like if you were there. And that's very powerful because it informs the part of the brain that simply doesn't listen to words, there's part of the brain that doesn't listen to narratives. And there's certainly a part of the brain that doesn't listen to mathematics for most people. If you articulate something in mathematics, it's just noise. It doesn't impinge on the brain as anything decodable.
That's well said.
I mean, most people can recognize E equals MC squared as an iconic formula. Very few people can take it apart and tell you what it really says. They don't know what it's like a word in Japanese that you don't know what the word means, or like the word Tao, DAO or TAO. It's a word, you can know the word. Do you know what it means? Good luck.
You read the
Good luck
Tao.
good luck finding, the Tao that can be spoken of is not the true Tao. It sort of defines itself as ultimately unknowable. And there are things that are ultimately unknowable, even in mathematics.
I think there's just too many things. Like if you start breaking it, the reductionist view of breaking it into things, then you get into infinite. Like whenever I think of mathematics, I think of what's between 1 and 2, infinite.
Exactly.
So when
Yeah.
you start thinking of infinites between 1 and 2, then what's between 1 and 17 quadrillion or some number like I don't even know what is the largest number that we can actually say without using exponents.
I think it's called, forget the guy's name, Graham's number. I think Graham's number, Ron Graham was a mathematician at Bell Labs. I don't know if he's still alive or not, but Ron Graham came up with a named number, it's named after him, which as far as I know, is the largest named number. But of course, you can always create a number larger than that and then give it a name, but
Like Smoots. I always remember
right.
Yeah.
The distance across the Harvard Bridge. Right.
but that's what we did in human society. We have qubits, we have meters, we have miles,
we have Teslas, we have Newtons, we have Farads,
Planck lengths.
we have volts, and they are all named after people. Those units are named after people.
Doesn't that say something right there?
Yep.
Well, it basically recognizes the people who said there ought to be a metric for some phenomenon. And so Volta got the metric for voltage got named after Volta. The metric for current, amperes, got named after Ampere. So.
And the C and MC squared is the speed of light.
Yeah.
Which is a metric.
I forget what the C stands for. I think a Latin word. I forget what it is.
Well, the reason I think about time is when things are stuck in permafrost and then they unthaw, they're essentially frozen for 30,000 years. So if a seed was in that permafrost and it unthawed, could it germinate and come to life? And I guess that's possible.
The answer is yes. I think they have actually germinated, not so much necessarily in permafrost. It could be any kind of storage, although cold storage is generally more long-lived than anything else. But yeah, they've
But
germinated.
what is that though? What is that seed? Like that's where I'm stuck on is, how can this potential energy be frozen for 30,000 years and then activate?
Because you put it in a nutrient bath where the temperature and nutrient environment is suitable for it to germinate. So a seed will not germinate unless the environmental conditions are right, and then it'll germinate. And if the DNA hasn't been damaged too much, the DNA will work. It's like computer instructions that are stored, in an algorithm on paper. You can bring them to life, and then if you put the instructions in a computer that can interpret them and execute them, it'll come to life. But you can store an algorithm in storage forever, as long as you don't destroy the storage medium.
So is the Earth just a giant seed that's come to life? And we're
it's an
parts...
environment that supports seeds that come to life.
But aren't we just part of that life that was created from?
Yeah.
If you look at all that from archaeology, like from Arcaria, how do you say it? Eukaryotes to every aspect of life on this planet is just a seed that like a bunch of minerals that cooled off and turned into this. I mean, what are we doing here?
Well, we're basically creating structures that are self-reproducing, a structure that has a behavior, and amongst the behaviors is making duplicates of itself. It's basically what a virus does. Computer virus is a piece of code that when it runs, it just makes a copy of itself. That's all it does. Its whole function is to make a duplicate of itself. And cells have that function that they can divide and make a duplicate of themselves. So the notion that
So we're just recreating a new kind of life, right?
well, so it's much more complicated. So the question is, how complicated can a system be and still reproduce without reproducing itself incorrectly? So it reproduces itself into garbage instead of an exact copy, or at least a good enough copy that's viable. So how can you duplicate something and make a viable copy as opposed to a DOA, dead on arrival duplicate, which is not a true duplicate? And you can also drop a duplicate where it can't
Yep.
function because it can't get the energy. But seeds have the property that they can be in a state of stasis for a long period, typically at least a season or two, or a few years. But ultimately, some can remain in a stasis for millennia.
That's amazing.
And then germinate. You know, how long can you keep milk in the refrigerator before it spoils? So, you know, things will last a certain amount of time before they degrade. And there are things that will last a long time without degrading. How long will this video remain without, you know, vanishing from some storage medium? You know, maybe a decade or two. I think eventually this video will whatever medium it's stored on, I think will eventually, just be dismantled.
Unless it gets copied and what's it called? Up generated to higher quality.
Yeah. So the way things persist is that if you keep copying them fast enough, you can have enough copies that there's always one remaining copy that hasn't yet died. But and that's really what life is. Life is making copies that, you know, last long enough to make a new copy before they fall apart.
That's what my cells are doing.
Yeah. And they will do that for, you know, so many decades, and, you know, and then your bodies will fall apart. Barbara Walters' body fell apart yesterday, and Cardinal Ratzinger's body fell apart yesterday.
Or her life force just went to another dimension.
Well, I mean, the dynamics stopped running.
Yep.
You know, when respiration ends, you know, then you stop, you know, the oxidation reduction reactions basically stop running. And then they go into degradation mode, decay mode.
But her memory lives on through all the people that met her and that saw her on television.
Right.
And
you know, what we call the spirit, you know, the memories in the spirit. And so a lot of people say, well, you know, she inspired me to go on and become a journalist of a certain stature. So, you know, there are people who are reinstantiating her practices. I mean, I reinstantiate some of the techniques that Aristotle and Socrates introduced and Newton introduced. A lot of ideas that were introduced by people who were long dead. I learned their techniques and reified them, reinstantiated them.
well, are we just mimic machines?
Well, that's one of the things we do.
If we're mimicking these.
A lot of our behavior is a replica of behaviors that we saw or experienced and then managed to replicate. There's not that much creativity that persists. Occasionally somebody will invent a new practice that's never been seen before, and others will imitate it and it will live. But that's pretty uncommon.
If it's adopted. I mean, there's a lot of new things that are created, but they don't get adopted, so they die
Right.
in behavior.
Because
Would you agree?
not enough people copy them. I mean, there was music that died out because not enough people reproduced it. And then languages die out because there's nobody left speaking it. When the last person to speak a language dies, and then there's nobody in the next generation who learns it, then that language dies. You may have the written version of it, but you don't know how to pronounce it.
Well, I think we're moving into a new era where you will know how to pronounce it, and people will be able to upload their intonation of their voice and their logical thinking, and
If you can keep the recording, if you can keep the sound recording and the technology for reproducing the sound recording back to real live audio, yeah. But it's also possible that that technology will grow obsolete so that the recorded, so for example, things that were recorded on wire recorders or those old phonograph media, they may get to the point where there's either no media left or no reproducing systems left to play the media. And that, that can happen. There may.
Or what if
very
they
well
just
be-
exist? Well, what if they're just a vibration that exists and then we think we're having a thought, but really it's an old echo of something from the past?
How would you know?
It's
How would
coming
you
in.
know if a thought that you're having is the first time that anybody had that thought, or you're simply having a thought that somebody you never heard of had the same thought, 3,000 years ago? How would you know?
That's a great question. You would look at things from 3,000 years ago and see if it resonates. Oh, wait, that's what I thought I had.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, say, am I plagiarizing somebody that I don't even know exists? Or am I plagiarizing something that I once heard and forgot that I heard it or where I heard it? And I thought I created something that in fact is actually reviving a long lost memory. Paul McCartney got sued for a song that was virtually identical to a pop song from a couple of generations before. And the question was, had he heard that song and recomposed it afresh, or did he compose afresh the same tune without knowing the old version? And the argument was the previous version was a popular tune, so he must have heard it. And there's a famous lawsuit about.
I'm curious what Stacy or Sam or Kayla think about this.
I don't think there's anything new. I think the creativity is in how you put it together and at what points you make the observations and just the way I've seen it happen with jokes. Something will happen in the public sphere and lots of people will come up with almost the same joke. They're
Right.
not copying anybody else. They've observed it and they use their own experience and they create something very similar.
Leonardo da Vinci, quote, invented the helicopter, but he couldn't build one because the metallurgy wasn't sophisticated enough. When the metallurgy became powerful enough, 3 people simultaneously invented a real helicopter. But does it invention? Because the idea goes all the way back to Leonardo. He just didn't have the metallurgy to make devices that could, last more than 2 revolutions before they wore out.
But that was the point I was trying to make before, just to shift the conversation a little bit. Why are we so focused on who gets the credit? Because I think that's what's really harmful to our society.
Because of ego and royalties.
I agree.
Patents and royalties and egos. So.
And
But again,
ownership. Yeah, I own.
right. And so if we don't solve for the need for ownership, we can't get away from any of those other problems that come because of it.
I think that's the biggest thing. So why
Huge.
so focused on who gets the credit? Yep. Thank you, Sam, for writing that down.
Yeah.
I think that's a big deal if we're going to move forward as a collective.
Well, if getting the credit means your livelihood, then you're interested in your livelihood because you don't want to do a lot of work and somebody simply steals your work and, makes it the basis of their livelihood and you're left in the lurch. So yeah, it's down to livelihood.
But what if you don't think that way and it's not stealing anymore, it's adding to the collective
Well, yeah. So in
for the benefit of all?
some domains, you give away your work and you don't even expect to get credit. In fact, a lot of people publish anonymously because they don't want credit. They don't want to even know that they don't want anybody to know who published the idea. So yeah, people can give stuff away and give it away anonymously. A lot of literature is initially published anonymously because it's controversial and they don't want the negative feedback from controversial work.
I think we need to create the system first where the credit won't matter. You can't just expect people to start thinking it won't matter, because in the system we're living in, it does matter for all the reasons that were already stated. And the people for whom it doesn't matter, they have a certain privilege that not everybody has. So again, I think we know what the reasons are. We touched on the reasons. Credit does matter for a whole bunch of different reasons.
Yeah.
How do we create a system where it won't matter?
You
Sam?
have to make it that it doesn't affect your livelihood.
Exactly. Good place to start.
Give everybody a livelihood gratis and it doesn't matter. Sam, you were going to say something?
I think in one small way, it's already happened in the open source world.
Yeah.
It used to be that software engineers get paid by whoever's employing them, but that software becomes proprietary and he therefore cannot share it. RMS came up with this whole notion that software should not be owned. And he created a particular license, which has now spawned entire industries and has hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people contributing to this model. It took decades though. It took about probably over 4 or 5 decades for that to happen. But because of the license, you now have incredible value in open source repositories, which would not have existed had people only stayed with a proprietary model. RMS had a model that intellectual property should be shared, should not be held, closely. But it takes a visionary like RMS, it takes a model like the GPL, and it takes adoption and adherence by generations, arguably more than one generation for this to happen. But as a result, we have a quote unquote different economy. We have an economy where a lot of people don't look at resumes anymore. It's less important to look at someone's resume today in a hiring world than it is to look at their GitHub history. And that's a huge change. It's a huge change. Your GitHub history and activity is way more important than the degrees and the resume in some hiring situations. Didn't happen overnight. But you could argue this is a different economy. You could also say, in a separate example, I believe it's Brazil, it may be a different country, that actually came up with a different currency. And they priced things in 2 different currencies for a while until the old currency went away. I'll have to look up the details of this. But such systemic change is difficult. And in one, it was a bottom-up license-based. The other, it was a, top-down. It was the creation of a different currency. And so the third story I'd like to touch on, which I think is still an incomplete story, is that the blockchain was supposed to be this. The problem is it hasn't achieved this, except for the very standard Ponzi scheme of the early bird gets the worm. The early people in blockchain got billions. Whereas the people that came decades later, they're trading the 5%. They're not held by the early people. And they're creating the value that makes those early people billionaires. But it hasn't really solved a truly useful real world use case, not that I can tell. NFTs are I can't even stop laughing about NFTs. So there are attempts to do this. They have numerous challenges. And it's a question of whether or not we can build on that. Something that applies the concepts of transparency, I think is going to be necessary. I think transparency, or what I call eventual transparency, will be necessary. But that's the last I'll say on this. Over.
Joshua.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of the Freedom of Information Act and eventual transparency. I think that's a really important concept, and that over time, everyone should be able to use everything. And I think that in my lifetime, that kind of got squashed when the Disney Corporation changed the length of their patents and their ownership of copyright for their characters that were created. I think we had some good systems in place to keep things evolving and keep the economy moving, and that kind of got stagnant. And I think it's important that we look at how we change laws. I think that, to me, the most important thing for our society to move forward is to put time periods on reevaluating laws that are on the books. And if they are needed, keep them. If they're not, let them go. And change the law. Laws need to change faster is what I'm saying, because the world is changing faster than the laws. And the economies are changing faster. The economy that we have now is not the economy we had 300 years ago.
And we have all these non-monetary economies. You have the information economy and the entertainment economy and the spiritual economy, the learning economy. You have these economies which don't really involve little pieces of green paper and goods and services. They're flows of something that's much more intangible.
Sam? Your hand is up.
I think Sam just neglected to take his hand down from the last time.
I think you're right.
Well, we haven't solved the world's problems, but we've certainly talked about them.
What's the opposite of a problem, Barry?
Well, you could say solution, but I don't think that's what you mean by the question.
Yeah, I think it's something different than solution.
I think maybe the opposite of a problem is nirvana, where there's simply nothing to worry about, nothing to be disturbed about. Serenity, maybe serenity.
I thought you were quoting a Beatles song there for a second. Nothing to get hung about.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yes.
Strawberry fields forever.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess a state of serenity or nirvana where there's nothing perplexing you that wants to be resolved. But here's the funny thing. That's also a recipe for boredom. Because what happens when you're bored? You go looking for something entertaining or challenging or stimulating. Like tonight, I'm going to go work with celebrate New Year's Eve, and they're going to do jigsaw puzzles on the table. Why do you do jigsaw puzzles? It's a problem, you know. But they do it because they don't want to be idle. Being idle is boring, and they want something to exercise their brain.
But you solved the problem. You found jigsaw puzzles. There's not that problem anymore.
Well, not for them. For me, it is because I'm terrible at jigsaw puzzles.
The word problem is interesting because if you're talking about a math problem, it's a challenge, and a
Right.
challenge can be a positive thing, and it can be motivating and is a good thing. Whereas a problem, some people problem is terrible.
Yeah.
I have problems.
Every day I watch a couple of videos of people solving logic problems, Sudoku class logic problems. And these are world-class solvers. And they get very perplexed in the middle of these problem-solving exercises. But there's something at the end of the day, it's a pleasure to observe somebody racking their brain to solve a hard problem.
I think we just did it here. The Global Challenges Collaboration Group. The opposite of problem, if you put challenges there, then we just have challenges. We don't have any problems.
I think by definition, challenge is something to be overcome. And so finding a method. And reality is a lot of times you never do find a method. You might make, tiny incremental progress, but you never really resolve it once and for all. You never write the book on it.
That's another interesting distinction. I always try to use the word challenge instead of problem anyway, but you just gave me another good reason. Challenge indicates something that you're going to try to overcome.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, I think the end is different for everybody. Like someone says, okay, we're done. We finished it. We completed that challenge. But someone goes, hey, can we run 20 miles? Can we run 26 miles? Can we run 75 miles? Like there's people that do marathons that are 3 marathons in one. Like, what are they doing? Like, I was done at 5 miles. I was good. Why are you guys trying to run so far?
Or can we do acrobatics in place, backflips and stuff like that?
Yeah. Parkour.
Yeah, parkour, yeah. Look, you see those videos, people doing parkour, it just blows your mind. You think, how can the body possibly do that? There was a story I read this morning. It may be anecdotal, that is apocryphal, but as an older man, Nikola Tesla was walking down the streets of New York, and it was icy, and he lost his footing, and he flipped this way so that he was going to fall on his back. And what he did is instinctively he managed to turn his body over and get his hands down to break his fall. And the guy behind him, a couple of paces behind him, saw him do that, and he stopped and he said, "How did you know how to do that?" He says, "I've seen a cat, fall and flip over. How did you do that?" And there was this sort of story about Tesla just talking about how his brain works in ways that nobody knows, but he managed to, turn his body over so that he was falling hands down instead of back down.
He twisted his body.
Yeah, he twisted his body. And in fact, people who do high dives, people who don't do high dives do these, flips in the air. And for the longest time, people couldn't explain how the body is able to do these flips in the air. And finally, somebody worked out that the fact that you can articulate your limbs and bend your body, those abilities to move parts of your body independent of each other is what gives you the ability to flip. Because from the point of view of elementary physics, you shouldn't be able to do that. If you don't have any angular momentum, how do you gain angular momentum when you have none to begin with? And the answer is because you've got four limbs that can move independently. So you can move one side of your body, and that will give you a torque. But the math of that's actually pretty complicated. And if a person said, "I have to work out the mathematics for that in physics," you couldn't. But somehow instinctively you do it.
Yeah, I got a storm coming in here. I just got wind. Sorry, guys. I don't know if you heard that.
No, didn't.
Oh, I forget. I have these new fancy earbuds that cancel out the noise outside of me. A huge gust of wind just came up. We gotta.
No, didn't hear a thing.
Yeah. Oh, cool. All right. That's technology right there for you.
And also the microphones are in the earbuds.
Yeah, they're in the earbud.
Wow. Yes, very good quality.
Yeah, I guess the noise canceling is pretty fancy on these things.
Yeah.
Which is yeah, picking up different frequencies. Well, I'll just share my big technology that QCell and I just purchased was a fancy massage chair from Costco, which I'm still in awe of how it works. I think it's a very interesting investment because I didn't think it would be as good as it is, and it's quite fancy machine. They really thought through the different types of there's air pressure, and it's called a 3D machine, so it uses 3 different dimensions of pushing on your back, and it's pretty fancy. It's I think I did the math of how much is a massage. It's around $60 to $100. How long will the chair last? How many massages can we get out of it? And it'll definitely pay for itself in a year.
There you go.
So hopefully it lasts longer than a year. But
It's a great
the
treat.
person, yeah, the people that created this, I can only imagine. When I was getting a massage in the chair, I was thinking someone was in a lab and said, put the pressure here, stretch the arm here, pull the leg out here, push on the hips. Like there's a lot of thought that went into this machine. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
It does
I have one
Swedish,
back there.
Chinese,
Yeah.
therapeutic, Thai. It's fascinating. I used to do massage, so that's why I'm like really fascinated with how they recapitulated that type of movement on a machine that's in a chair and
Yeah.
it tilts back so you're lying on your back. It's really fancy. It's amazing. I didn't know the technology existed, and it's thank you Japanese people because it's a Japanese massage chair. It's really fascinating. But well, I have to get to the dump before the storm comes in, and I can feel the wind changing and the temperature changing. So I should probably leave a little early today.
Well, Happy New Year.
But Happy New Year's to all you guys. Thank you for doing this global challenge for this long a period of time and for trying to at least talk through some of these things. I really think that this is valuable training for a pre-trained general model of that's, I was hoping we would get to this point and still have GCC where there are training model sets that could take every word that we've ever said and put it into a logical system and allow other people to talk to it in the future. I really think that we've come a long way and we're actually at that point now. It's just a question of us agreeing to put it into a pre-training model. And I hope we do that.
Separating the wheat from the chaff. There's an awful lot of chaff.
That's for a computer model to figure out.
Exactly.
Or someone in the future to ask the questions of, well, what would Stacy think about this? They can ask the GPT and then it would say, well, Stacy said in 2019 this, and then she said this in 2021, but then Sam said this, and I would extrapolate that they can ask the person, what do you think? And do the Socratic method. I think it would be interesting.
I'd
It would
love to
be
go
nice.
to,
Sorry, go ahead, Barry.
I was just gonna say, I'd love to go to GPT and say, can you explain something I wrote as if you were explaining it to a kindergartner? And see if
It'll do that.
Yeah, well,
It's really good at that. That's one of the things it's really good at is rewriting, because it's just a trained model. So it'll rewrite your words in its understanding of the language model.
I mean, I once asked Stacy to
child.
do that for me. And I asked Jennifer to do it. I asked Jennifer to do it too. Can you rewrite what I wrote for your audience?
It would be really nice
Well,
to be
I'll
able
take some of your writing and ask it.
It
Please
would be
do.
really,
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Stacey.
that's okay. I was going to say it would be really nice to be able to pick a handful of people and then ask the computer combined, what would these 5 people think together? Because like I know when I have a question, I go to a certain person that I really respect and trust for that answer. I may not go to that same person for a problem that is on a different subject matter. So I would like to know the combination of how they would react together. And especially
It's
because
really good for that as well.
I hope so, because that's the part that scares me. That's the part that I'm concerned. Again, I don't know enough about technology or how that works, but my concern is that sometimes when things are put together, I mean, the order in which things are put together is critical. And that scares me.
I
Sam?
like your thoughts, Stacy. I would further then say, what could it come up with if we asked it to write a screenplay about, and then pick your last 3 or 4 or 5 favorite thinkers, philosophers, whomever, Spinoza, Einstein, Aristotle, Jung, pick them and then see, what would come up. In fact, what if Engelbart had met Eric Jansch back in 1968? They're so close at one point, but they didn't know about each other, right? Those kind of what ifs would be fascinating. I think that's a very good line of experimentation with something like ChatGPT or its derivatives. Did I shut you all up? It's almost top of the
No,
hour.
I was answering one of your questions in chat, but I'm very slow at typing because I'm getting old and slow at typing.
And I'm just dreaming into what you said. That's like so many great thoughts come from that.
And this is an example. When you get 3 or 4 people and putting together these ideas from each of them. right, Stacy?
All right. You want a definition of economy. Well, I wrote a definition of economy in that section of my paper.
Clicking on it now. It gives examples. Where's the definition?
Just underneath
A
the
flow of commodity within a system.
yeah, and then I give some, I sort of expand on that. So, because what kind of commodities and well, the system sort of doesn't need just a space. And then I give multiple examples of things other than the material economy, goods and services, other kinds of things, but flow of something.
To me, that feels incomplete, but that's just my first
Well,
impression.
yeah, all definitions are incomplete because you really got to.
No, it seems to lack the notion of value / exchange.
Well, if you look
Can
at
you
the
take a
at the rhyming metrics, the rhyming metrics sort of suggest, the thing that you're measuring the value of.
And in the spiritual economy, what is the commodity that flows?
Energy. Energy.
Yeah, well, it's whatever you think the word spirit means. But let's see, do I actually say that down here? So I say at the bottom, in the spiritual economy, we might have those rare moments of insight that are divinely inspired, which you call grits. It's just a rhyming metric. So, for example, the aha moment, the moment of awe or inspiration, epiphany.
Questions are not critical, Barry. I love this article.
I'm sorry, say that again. I missed the whole
I
sentence.
said my questions are not critical. I love this article.
Yeah, but yeah, so you write something up that sort of tries to give you a big picture view of something, and so there was a big picture view of economies that goes beyond just the classical spiritual economy, classical material economy.
So
And that-
riffing on something that Stacy said, when I ask a question, it's not necessarily to get an answer, it's to get a dialogue.
Yep.
That's what we can co-create. Getting an answer says, okay, it was created then, let me just use that. But the interaction, hopefully, is an opportunity to co-create.
Yeah. And that's really where I'm going with all this published work of mine for the last 35 years, is that I want the next generation to create something that at least is built on at least some elements of it that they wouldn't have built otherwise. As for example, how would you rephrase any of that material for a more general audience, a middle-class audience, a middle school audience, and because I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to express really, really abstract mathematics to a more general audience. Maybe your dad does, but then maybe your dad only writes for other mathematicians.
He writes for high school students.
Well, there you go. Okay, so yeah, and I had wanted to know whether your dad would have been able to put any of that material into a math course for high school students that would work. I mean, if anybody has any chance of saying yes or no to that, it'd be your father.
You mean his material or your material?
So let's say that in high school students, you're trying to introduce the beginnings of thinking about calculus, sort of the beginner's course on calculus. And usually the beginner's course on calculus is simply, dealing with ordinary motion, things in motion obey some very simple Newtonian mathematics. And that's all true, but that's not very interesting examples. And I wanted an example of the calculus applied to a case where nobody ever thought you could even apply it, and it would be interesting to high school students. So can you apply the calculus to the dynamics of emotions and learning, the learning journey? Can you borrow from the calculus to map out a learning journey and use the same Newtonian concepts, but not something so mundane as simply ordinary motion? And I don't know if anybody's ever tried that.
We could launch into that. That would take another hour.
Well, not today, but at some point, if your father is presenting mathematical concepts aimed at high school students, that's one thing that I would love to get an answer to. Does it work with high school students?
Man, I wish I knew calculus.
I mean, there are parts of calculus that you know intuitively. If you know how to throw and catch a ball, which almost every child plays catch, how do you know where to stand to catch the ball when it gets there? Or how do you know how to throw it so that it lands where you want it to go? So ball players are very good at calculus because they're throwing and catching, moving objects at very high speed, in very complicated motion. And they're doing calculus in their head. I mean, just standing up and not falling over, that's a calculus problem.
Well, I
inverted
told
problem.
you, intuitively, I'm very good at math.
Right.
I just, in high school, I couldn't wait to drop math. I couldn't wait to be done with it, but I'm sorry, now that I didn't. I mean, I took physics in a grad school setting because it was a way to get it paid for when I was going for my teaching degree. And I loved it. But all through high school, I couldn't wait to get out of math and science. So now I'm kind of like disappointed that I didn't learn calculus because maybe there was something there for me.
So let's say that when you were taking calculus, introductory calculus, if they had included a model of the roller coaster of emotions and learning as an example of using the calculus, maybe you would have said, oh, now that's interesting. I don't care about throwing a ball or a rocket in space, but yes, a learning curve, that would be an interesting way to gain some insight from the calculus. Maybe you'd have stayed.
Absolutely. And I want to go back to something I said before, because out of context, it sounds really weird. When I mentioned Buckminster Fuller, obviously the architecture and all that, I have nothing in common there.
Yeah.
But the social characteristics, I feel so much resonance. And that makes me think, if there's so much resonance there, what else could be untapped? And that's what I meant. So I agree with you. It would be nice to see your work combined with something that was purely mathematical that would usually appeal to a different personality type.
I mean, I also claim that a fair amount of theology is really mathematical, but it's in a narrative form where you don't even realize that underneath the narrative there's some mathematics. And it's very hard for people who are into narrative theology to even conceive that there's any math underneath it.
Well, I saw math in your scapegoating example.
Exactly. And in fact, that's one of the systems theoretic models that knocked my socks off. When I saw Rene Girard's systems theoretic model that involved the scapegoating as an element of the model, that was a real eye-opener for me. At that point, I understood something that had perplexed me for my whole life. Because he put he just put it in the language of the systems thinker, which I happen to be. So he wrote it in my language. Theomathy is the word I made up. Not the word of God, not the storybook version of it, but the mathematical version of it. See, where did I write that up? I'll put that in there. There it is. Copy link address. So Yeah, it's interesting what you can do with mathematics when you sort of get out of the classical applications of mathematics to some of these more esoteric applications. The same kind of thinking, systems thinking, analytical reasoning, model-based reasoning.
Sibir, I think I'm going to take an opportunity to push you a little bit on this theology and mathematics idea. I think while there are potentially parts of it that are not contradictory, I think the specificity of mathematics and the generality of terms in theology are worlds apart.
They are. That's why I don't like narrative theology, because narrative theology can stray. It's the same thing in narrative science. When a journalist tries to explain some scientific theory, like the Higgs boson, and they start using these metaphors of molasses and stuff, the narrative explanation of science is so far off the science that it does a disservice.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm not a big fan of narrative theology.
Okay, then I need to say no more.
It's too easy. It's too easy to wander.
Hand
from-
wave
Yeah.
and basically wander from specific definitions.
Right.
And then these vague definitions can be so personal
Yeah.
that it becomes almost useless.
And to make up nomenclature. So you have things like apocalypse and epiphany and transcendence and all these words which you could map them somehow into something that's more analytical.
Yeah.
But the thing is that once they're introduced, they become these suitcase words that, they reference something that's so vague and abstract that you don't know what they reference anymore.
Yep. See, that's why I think I'm not against an understanding of spirituality, but I am against
Bogus versions of it.
I would say
misleading and bogus and
that's right.
and non-constructive, non-instructive versions of it,
That's
where
right.
it just begins to sound like a lot of bullshit.
That's right.
And its meaning is so vague that you can't really extract the meaning in any consistent, reliable, analytical sense. I want to be able to map it to something analytical, systems theoretic, which is what Girard did.
Well, Barry, I'm about to say Happy New Year.
Happy
I'll
New
come
Year.
on tomorrow. Hopefully my voice will be better tomorrow.
You don't do any more yelling, okay?
Yeah, I don't
That's
have
not a
much
rule,
to
it's just a
do.
suggestion.
It's a
I
rule.
won't yell at you if you yell. I'll just suggest that it's not a constructive mechanism.
It's sometimes cathartic, but in the long run,
Cathartic for you, but it may be damaging to other living creatures around you.
even to self.
Yeah, yes. Ultimately, it'll hurt you, which it has. It's made it hard to talk.
All right, Bear.
Ciao.